Great. So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's FDEA member insight session, which today I'm delighted to say we're joined by our newest in-market expert member. We have a company called Global ST, and Diana Trejo has joined us and is going to run through opportunities in the three key markets that they cover as a business. For those of you that aren't aware, the FDEA has a whole series of in-market members who are commercial operators in their market, able to support you in your export journey through bespoke projects and work. And today we're very hopeful that Diane's going to enlighten us all on these three important markets in a part of the world that we're getting more and more inquiries from. So we think this is a very timely opportunity to update ourselves. So I'm going to go on mute and enjoy listening to this and hand everything over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, it's our pleasure to be able to speak on opportunities for Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. As Sandra mentioned, we cover Latin America, and we wanted to, as we were discussing maybe how's the best way to start maybe a segment on Latin America, we thought let's highlight Mexico, Colombia, and Peru, three very strategic markets for the Latin American region, and kind of cover maybe the most important parts that someone might need to know before entering the market. So this information is great for maybe if you're a beginner in the region, or if you're more experienced, I'm sure that you can also find some valuable information. As Sandra mentioned, my name is Diane. I work at Global Strategies and Tools, where we support companies as they enter the Latin American market. Our company has been operating, I think now for 21 years. So we have a lot of experience in the region. And I'm currently in Los Angeles. So it's 7 a.m. in the morning. If anything maybe comes out a little weird, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I do blame it on that, but it's great to be here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And I'll just get straight into it then. Starting with consumer behavior in Mexico, I wanted to maybe share a little bit about what are the consumers' behavior in these regions before we get into more of the dense information. In terms of consumers in Mexico, many are worried about their personal financial situations, with 50% expressing high levels of concern. In the general region, there has been some sort of effect in inflation and higher costs. So this is reflected by consumers being worried about their spending in terms of food and beverage and this in the markets and restaurants and the different segments. And approximately almost 70% of consumers have modified their non-essential spending in the last 6 months. And this is also aligned with the current situation in Mexico. And in terms of maybe their preferred way to spend their money, it's 43% continue preferring physical stores. We do see that a lot of the markets in terms of Mexico specifically, but also Colombia, Peru, and other countries in Latin America, it seems that consumers are moving more towards the online platform, online shopping. It's becoming increasingly popular, as we see with 43% of consumers are planning to increase their online purchases within the next 6 months. And in terms of health, maybe preferences in terms of products, we see that 25% of the population that responded to this survey, they're considering more healthy options with low or no sugar being a very important factor in their decision making. And this is a great, I think, in my opinion, a great news is that 60% of consumers are willing to pay for premium, healthier products. I want to highlight that because in the past, Latin America has always been seen as a very price-sensitive market. It continues being very price-sensitive, but I do think that as consumers are growing their interest in more premium, healthier products, it allows for more growth for imported products from the UK specifically, where maybe the price point is a little higher than local options. We'll move on to Colombia now. So Colombia is is a market that I have very close to my heart. I just came back from a trip to Colombia. We did some business there. But in terms of consumer behavior, um, what is happening now in households, everyone is rethinking their budgets, their expenses, their investments. This is affecting many different sectors, but especially the food and beverage. This is due to the economic slowdown that has been happening, as there has been almost zero growth in the economy. So that, along with inflation that is happening, as I mentioned before in the previous slide, it is affecting the Colombian households in terms of spending. The consumers are spending almost 40% of their income on food, but they do purchase less frequently, which is only about 1 to 2 times per week on average. This is opposed to maybe different markets where the purchasing frequency is a little higher. And in terms of the pressures that they're currently facing, there's higher income tax. As I mentioned, there's a many factors in the economic side. So higher income tax. There's also a new tax in Colombia that is the single-use plastic tax. It's pretty new to many of the buyers. So this is something that has been affecting the purchasing power, as well as the 15% tax on ultra processed foods, which is going to continue to rise in 2025. This is all a part of some sort of um, kind of development that the government is trying to do against the ultra processed food to push the consumer into better eating habits. We'll also talk a little bit more about this in another slide. So consumers, what we have been seeing, just quick facts, almost all of them want to find cheaper prices. They continue being price sensitive, but 77, almost 80% are willing to substitute their products and brands. So that means that there's not a very high brand loyalty. But as long as they're maybe lower prices, better quality, they're willing to switch. And they would also be changing their shopping location. A majority would be open to that. And almost 50% would be open to switching product size and packaging to save money. We'll jump into Peru as well and cover a little bit about the consumer behavior in this market. In 2024, almost 70% of the public that was surveyed for this activity, they all shared that almost 70% want to make conscious efforts into choosing healthier food. So as I mentioned on the Mexico slide, this is something that is a trend that we're seeing throughout the market, throughout the different countries. And when Peruvian customers are looking to choose a food product, they do like to see maybe the freshness or good taste. So a company can incorporate that into the branding or into some sort of marketing to be able to highlight that so they can gauge the interest of the consumers. As for maybe how they like to eat in Peru, many of them they prefer to cook the meals at home. However, the newer generations often do not like to cook at home. They would like to eat out, and this is a newer trend amongst the younger generation, which I definitely understand. I get where that's coming from. It's always great to go out to eat. And in terms of supermarkets and traditional food markets in Lima, for example, many of the consumers, what they really value is friendliness, quality, proximity, the atmosphere, prices, and the perception of the product. This, what I want to highlight, is the prices and the perception of the product. It would be important to conduct that analysis to make sure that you are aligned with the market to be able to compete in terms of price and perception, as this is something that influences the purchasing decisions. While they're at the supermarket, they might be swayed one way or another, depending on this. And now we'll go into some of the key imports, more of the dense information regarding the imports, key products in Mexico. First, we'll look at maybe the key imports from the UK specifically. So what we've seen is alcoholic beverages, chocolates, biscuits, and processed foods are some of the top imports from the UK. But I also wanted to see maybe what are the growth areas that I can highlight for you within the previous years. And what we've seen is gin is growing, premium chocolates are also growing. We can see gin is increasing by 20% in this period. And this also is very aligned with maybe a little bit of the culture that's in Mexico, as there's an expanding cocktail culture. Drinking has always been something that's very incorporated into the Mexican culture, but I do feel that in recent years it's becoming a more premium experience, or a more valued in terms of quality, or in terms of specialty drinks. So that has also been supporting maybe the growth that is happening there for that specific item in Mexico. In terms of chocolate, there's a 15% increase, and this is due to the middle class that is growing in Mexico, as consumers are getting a taste for the more luxury items. In terms of sauces, there's a 10% rise in sauces. This can be maybe contributed to the demand for organic or health conscious options in Mexico. And some of the key important products in general in Mexico, I would say, would be, for example, dairy products, meat products, processed fruits, vegetables, snack foods. This is, as I mentioned before, largely due to the growing middle class and the large population that Mexico has. It's one of the largest countries in Latin America. And maybe just to highlight specific items that are among the most imported, at least for the 2023 period. For example, corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, those sorts of products are among the top 20. You also have, as I mentioned, multiple meat items, dairy, seafood, fish. I would also like to highlight maybe some the beverages in general, not alcoholic, just regular beverages, is also something that is among the most imported in Mexico, at least for 2023. And kind of going on that line of thought, the key sectors of growth that we were able to identify in Mexico in general have been the functional and health oriented beverages. This is a trend that we're seeing in many markets in the Latin America region, but specifically in Mexico, it seems that maybe the more healthy beverages are taking a lot of movement there in the market. In terms of health related items, plant-based food and beverages are also becoming increasingly popular as consumers are looking to more healthy options. And there's also a higher demand for premium, as I mentioned with the chocolate. Kind of this is also bleeding into the other lines where consumers are looking for more artisanal or premium products that they might have not been able to get in the past. In Colombia, what we have been seeing, the key imports from the UK is also alcoholic beverages. They also are importing a lot of chocolate and dairy products from the UK. And similarly, the notable areas of growth within the period of 2019 to 2023 is also whiskey. It is also alcohol. In this case, it would be whiskey and craft beers. These are two items that have been growing notably in this past period, with 15% for whiskey and 10% for craft beers. And for cheeses, which is always great to see that there's a 12% increase in specialty cheeses, as the consumers are getting into the more gourmet, the more artisanal products. As I also mentioned in Mexico, this is something that is happening in Colombia as well. As also there's a better offer in terms of, we'll get into this in another slide, but just a little preview. There are a lot of specialty supermarkets that are opening up, and more high-end supermarkets that are kind of easier to access to. So I do believe that that is something that is supporting these notable growth areas. Whiskey, craft beer, specialty cheeses are things that maybe the consumer that has more premium tastes will be interested into. And in general, the key products that are imported into Colombia, they include, for example, dairy products, Pork is an item that is very often imported. Soups or other preparations, spirits, processed vegetables are all very important imports to Colombia. But maybe more specifically, we can get into some of the top 20, at least for 2023. For example, all of what I mentioned before, there's also surprisingly a lot of coffee that is imported into Colombia. As Colombia is a country that is known for coffee, it also does import as well. And for example, cereals is one of the top products that is imported into Colombia. And as I mentioned, seafood, vegetables, fruits, nuts. Um, there's also a lot of live animals that are actually imported, not just the meat products, but also the live animals and baking related products is what we were able to see. Very similar to Mexico, increasing demand of health conscious products. There's a growth in plant based. I remember many years ago in Colombia, you could never find anything plant based, and now there's multiple options for people that are plant based. So it does show that it's something that is increasing. There's still space in the market for plant based items and alternatives. But this is something that is growing, and I have seen firsthand how that has been growing in the market. In terms of beverages, in this case for Colombia, it's also something that we have been identifying as a key sector of growth. But in terms of maybe more of the bottled beverages, like those smoothies that come in bottles or those juices that you might be able to get from the supermarket, kind of the drinks that are on the go that replace maybe something that's more elaborate that you have to wait for. It facilitates the process for the consumer to be able to consume this product without having to wait too long. And there's also something that I think is very interesting for Colombia is the rising interest in meal preparation. This is based on the convenience of being able to get something that's prepared. This is something that is growing. It's new. It's maybe traditionally not something that has been very important to the Colombian market nor accepted. So this is a great growth, I believe, in terms of the consumers changing. It's going out of its traditional ways. It's exploring new options. It's kind of maybe aligning with other markets, for example, the UK or Europe in general, or maybe the United States, where these foods are more popular. So Colombia is also growing in that direction. As for Peru, we also saw that key imports, there's whiskey, there's a lot of snack foods that are imported from the UK, such as crisps and biscuits. There's also dairy products that are commonly imported from the UK, and the notable growth areas are basically the same as the key imports in the UK. In the period of 2019 to 2023, whiskey grew by almost 20%, biscuits by 12, and cheeses by almost 10. So these are products that are growing. They're the most commonly imported, but they're also the ones that are facing the highest growth in the market. And in general, what Peru usually imports from many different markets, food products such as processed foods, beverages. This is growing because of the increasing consumer purchasing power. Peru is a country that is growing a lot in that sense. So consumers are able to get to products that maybe they were not able to purchase in the past. And the top imported products for Peru in 2023, I would just like to highlight maybe some oils, palm oil, soybean oil, wheat, corn. Those basic materials have also been imported a lot, as these have many different applications. There's rice, there's sugar, milk, cream powder. There's multiple of different dairy products that are commonly imported, not just from the UK, but also in general. Chocolate is also another one that is very commonly imported into Peru. And many meats, poultry, pork, beef. There's also coffee extracts and vegetable extracts. fruit, juices as well. And as we maybe to highlight some trends in the general consumers for imports, for example, there's opportunity for superfoods and organic products as consumers will also be going into that direction in Peru for the more healthy options. Plant-based is growing in the entire region, also in Peru. Functional beverages. So we've mentioned maybe a few times this sort of beverage, this healthy beverage. For Peru, it's more in the sense of those that have those specific maybe superfood items incorporated into the beverage. It's doing pretty well. Maybe moringa, for example, some sort of lemonade with moringa could work. Just thinking off the top of my head, and a lot of food convenience food in urban areas is also growing, as I mentioned in Colombia, similar in Peru as well. Convenience food is something that maybe traditionally was not accepted until more recent times where the consumer is busy now and they're more open into exploring the convenience food area. There's also a strong focus on sustainability. So being able to highlight that would be important as a marketing idea. So now we'll go into a little bit of the details in terms of distribution channels for each specific market. In terms of food service industry, we'll go through all three first. In Mexico, the food service market was approximately 32 billion. And this is with a compound annual growth of 8% from 2024 to 2032. So it seems that it's going to continue growing, and it's expected to reach by 2023 almost 70 billion. So the key channels and segments within this industry in Mexico specifically, I would like to highlight the quick service restaurants. This quick service restaurant includes the typical large market share players that kind of you see in many countries. Burger King, McDonald's, Starbucks, they definitely lead that sector. But I would like to highlight that almost 50% of the consumers, they do prefer, when choosing somewhere to dine out, they do prefer these quick service restaurants. In terms of full service restaurants, in 2021, there was almost 75,000 establishments. So this is the highest concentration is in the capital city in Mexico. And in terms of cloud kitchens, this is something that is pretty interesting for the Mexican market, as the Mexican market was pushed into having more cloud kitchens as the pandemic happened. It accelerated the growth of this specific segment, definitely as many consumers relied on technology. This is a common theme that we'll be mentioning multiple times. Technology in terms of the delivery services have grown exponentially in Latin America. And this is one of the fastest growing segments specifically for the food industry, the food service industry in Mexico. And this growth in general of this segment, the food service industry, it can be attributed to, for example, the growth of tourism. We obviously went through a period where tourism was not one of the most important things that was happening at that moment, and many people were not able to travel. And as this is finally going back to normality and growing, this is increasing the customer spending on dining experiences, as the consumer that is a tourist might be more inclined to spend more money or more frequent these types of restaurants. In terms of opportunities and challenges, there's still a high competition. So maybe in terms of catering to health conscious options is important to companies. So being able to find suppliers that have health conscious options are important. It's growing, and companies are increasingly looking for suppliers of these specific products. And as companies go into more, as businesses on the food service industry side start to grow into more of the underserved regions, get out of those hubs, This is also an opportunity for suppliers as supply will be increasing. The supply need will be increasing, and this will be a great opportunity to penetrate the market, maybe in unexpected areas, maybe in the less known cities. That could be a great opportunity for companies to segment those specific areas, demographics, and suppliers that work in distributors that work in those areas. In terms of Colombia, Colombia food service industry is also very strong. Colombia is a smaller market than Mexico, of course, and it has a size of 8 billion of the food service profit for the sector. And this is growing. It has a compound annual growth rate of 11% from 2022 to 2027. It's a market that's going to continue growing as we see by the data that is presented. In terms of the key channels and segments for this specific food service industry in Colombia, pubs, clubs, and bars are one of the largest profit sectors in this specific channel, in this distribution channel, accounting for almost 50% of sales volume. And this is, as I mentioned, now people are going out. Maybe they're going out a little more than what they used to. And there's also a lot of events that are growing this channel specifically. A lot of kind of fun events. In terms of full service restaurants, this has always been a significant portion of the market for Colombia. And the latest data for when it was valued, it was in 2016 with only 1 billion. But what we were able to see is that from that point to 2021, it was projected to grow 4.4%. Unfortunately, I was not able to get one of those more updated numbers for that, but we're able to see that it's a segment that is very important to the market. It takes up a large share as well as the pubs, clubs, and bars. But it's something that is continuing growing as we see with the compound annual growth rate. In terms of the quick service restaurants, it was previously valued at 700 million, somewhat less than the full service restaurants, but it has seen a quick recovery post-pandemic. It's also very reliant on delivery and takeaway service. So I do believe that this segment will continue growing as we've mentioned, as technology keeps growing the delivery service. So these are different segments that will be strategic for companies to take advantage of, find distributors that tend to these markets specifically, to these segments specifically. In terms of what sort of maybe restaurants you'll find in this segment, we see a lot of domestic chains and independent operators, as well as the typical international big companies. But domestic chains and independent operators are the most commonly found option among these. So being able to work with these companies would be very important if you want to incorporate into the food service industry. Finding a strong distributor would be important. And let's move on to Peru. In Peru, the food service industry is the food service market was valued at 5.6 billion, and it's projected to grow from 2021 to 2026 at 10%. And growth is being driven by spending, also going back to the tourism. So this is something that is going to continue growing in the short term and long term. In terms of the segments, quick service restaurants, full service restaurants are two very strong, important considerations for this industry, for this distribution channel. This is definitely, for example, the full service restaurants, 41% profit for this specific segment. It takes up a large amount of where the consumers are going, what the focus should be as a supplier for this specific segment. And coffee shops and tea shops are also something that is growing. It's something that in Peru, is in since 2021, it's representing almost 4% of the profit from the sector. So this is also something that is growing. And in terms of, we'll move on into I'm trying to kind of jump around a little bit faster as I see that we are getting close to the halfway point. So retail food market, I'll go over all three of the markets at the same time because there are some differences, but I do see that there are many things that are aligned in the three markets. So it'd be redundant to kind of go through each one specifically. So in general, for all three, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru, we have three things that we'll be looking at: the distribution channels, which are the hypermarkets, supermarkets, the traditional retail outlets, and e-commerce. So these are three channels that fall within the retail food market. And the competitive landscape, funny enough, these three leading companies are they are present in the three countries that we're looking at. So it's a mix of international and local operators. So we have these three large international, very very prominent throughout all of Latin America, but also present in Mexico, Colombia, Peru. And we also have the local chains that are very present in each country. And the consumer trends regarding specifically the retail food market is that since there is a huge increase in dine-in occasions, social gatherings. In terms of the social gatherings, consumers are needing to go to the retail food market to be able to support these social gatherings, whether they be at home or maybe some sort of park where they're able to enjoy these items together. There's also an increase in the market, as mentioned many times. Technology is also affecting this market as it isn't. I would say internationally, it's increasingly an option where people can purchase things from the retail food market through technology. So this also contributes to the growth of the general segment. And I would just like to highlight that although everything has been very positive, the market is still very price sensitive. It's still a price conscious consumer that is always looking for the value for money offerings and always have an eye on the rising prices within their market. In terms of maybe more specific market information for Mexico, for example, retail sector, drinks is the most growing category within the retail food market, and mass market players accounted for almost 80% of sales in 2020. In terms of Peru, this is another market where the drinks is the fastest growing category, and market players, the mass market players account for 95%. So it is a market that is growing, but at the same time dominated by those existing players inside of the market. In terms of the general perception of the retail food market, as I mentioned in the past, maybe at the beginning of the presentation, there is a rising offer for more premium supermarkets, not only the discounted or the low cost supermarkets, which continue being very, very important in these markets. There's also the premium ones that I think they serve as a great vehicle to be able to share these maybe new imports from the UK, be able to highlight the benefits of whatever that product might have or what makes it special, the competitive advantage, being able to highlight that through marketing and also putting it on the shelves of a premium supermarket might be a great strategy for someone that competes in more of this area of business. And in terms of the last segment that we'll be looking at for this specifically, for the distribution channels, is the food and beverage processing industry in Mexico specifically. It's 4.9, almost 5% of the GDP of Mexico. So it is a very strong, important sector in Mexico, with food industry alone accounting for almost 4%. Then the beverage and tobacco sectors, it accounts for 1%. And this sector, the segment itself has experienced consistent growth. The food industry production value has increased almost 90% over the past decade. Many of these products are for either internal use, so national use, Mexican consumers, as well as exporting. Nearshoring in Mexico has been a very important strategy in recent years, considering it's touching the United States has been very important to grow this food and beverage processing industry. And nearshoring is something that has supported that growth. So it's definitely something that's important. These companies, these manufacturers, these processing companies, they do need supplies. They do need companies that are able to provide some sort of solution for their processing. And in terms of imports, food and beverage, they as similar to what we mentioned in the past, dairy products, grains, edible oils, cocoa products, food additives are major imports for this specific segment. And the suppliers include United States, Canada, and European countries, which I would like to highlight there is that it's great to see in when we're looking at what is the opportunity for UK companies, it's great to see that Mexico is already working with United States, Canada, and other European countries, because that means that the price point that they may be used to in this specific segment is a little higher than, for example, if they were working with other markets such as a market in Latin America or in Asia that have more competitive pricing. So it does seem very interesting to me that they are working with these specific countries already, which provides a great opportunity for someone that's looking to penetrate that specific segment. In terms of Colombia, we have a 7% growth of this specific segment with a great growth in cocoa, chocolate, and related products with 16%, beverages and tobacco 12%, and fruit, vegetable, pulses, and tuber products 11%, as well as the bakery items. So that's kind of the distribution of the industry itself. And in terms of trade and imports, what they usually are importing for this specific segment, it continues being agricultural products, as the amount that they have domestically is not enough to sustain the raw materials that is needed for this production. And the ingredients, the raw materials are very important to be imported to make sure that they do maintain the levels of processing that they're doing in the country. So this provides us with a great perspective as the demand of these products are growing, as the production is also growing and not being able to be supported with products locally or ingredients locally. In terms of Peru, the food and beverage processing industry is 27% of the GDP. So it's a very important sector for Peru. It did have a slight decline in 2020, but rebounded in 2021 with almost 10% growth. And this recovery was strongly driven by the performance in, for example, in milling and bakery products and canned seafood and confectionery product production. In terms of trade and imports, Peru significantly imported, for example, milling, bakery, and confectionery products because the amount that was produced locally was not able to meet up to what they needed for production. Similar to Colombia, it was a very similar situation. And in terms of what is normally imported, as we mentioned, wheat, grain, dairy products such as powdered milk, specialty cheeses, and other dairy components, as well as food additives and ingredients. So now going into the more technical information as for regulatory and the requirements around this. It's very specific, but I do want to maybe cover the general ideas of what someone should take into consideration for this specific market, in this case, Mexico. For example, the import permits that one will need to have is it's issued by the Federal Commission for the Protection Against Sanitary Risk. This is required to certain food products. It's important to work with an ally to understand and navigate these specific regulations. In terms of the sanitary measures, it is also mandatory to comply. As many countries, it's mandatory to comply. And this is done with the National Service for Agroalimentary Public Health, Safety, and Quality. So this organization is the one that provides those guidelines and certifications to prevent the entry of pests and diseases. So it's important to also take that into consideration, look at the guidelines and certifications that are required by this entity. In terms of the labeling requirements, maybe some of you have seen those little, they look like little patches that they put on products. This is something that we see in Mexico as they put these specific labels as to if something is high in sodium, high in sugar. It's something that has been a challenge for many companies that are entering the market, but as once you are able to incorporate that into the process, then or understand when it's needed, then it becomes a lot easier after that. There is also mandatory label information. It must be in Spanish, and there's also just small details there that have to be considered with the labeling. This is very important to look at specifically what the product is and be able to go from there. In terms of Colombia, also, import documentation is very important. There has to be a file to import the registration form for the Colombian Ministry of Commerce, Industry, and Tourism. It's required to all importers. There's also the sanitary registration. The sanitary registration, it used to take maybe not so long, and recently with all of the backlog and a lot of requests, it does take a little bit longer. It can take over 6 months to be able to get that registration, and it's completely necessary to get that registration before being able to market the product. And it takes maybe a very specific information to be able to get this registration, such as the analysis, manufacturing details, the label mock-up, technical information. So there are companies that help, similar in Mexico. There are companies that help with this process that are experts in doing so and can facilitate the process. It's also free to do directly yourself. So there's guides that allow you to be able to understand what you have to do. It just would take a lot less time if you do work with an expert in this, or maybe will help with the language barrier there. In terms of labeling, as I mentioned in Mexico, same in Colombia, there are little kind of signs that they put little. I think it would be considered a hexagon that is put on the labeling where it says this product is high in sugar, it's high in sodium, and this has been a big challenge for importing products that maybe they come from markets where this is not mandatory. The label does have to be in Spanish as well, and I do think that it's important to work with an ally or be able to understand specifically what your product will be needing in terms of labeling, as there are kind of small details there, similar to Mexico. INVIMAS is the organization that will also be looking at maybe the additional requirements for certain products. So it is important to take into consideration what is a product and what is that specifically requiring. In terms of Peru, there's also the National Customs Tax Administration where importers must register, similar to Colombia, and they have to get that registry number to be able to import that product. In terms of sanitary measures, similar to the other markets, it's required to submit the application along with any of the required documents that are outlined inside of the General Doctrine of Environmental Health. So these are considerations that must be taken they must be considered to be able to submit the application and get that approved to be able to sell and market the products inside the market. In terms of labeling requires, it has to also be in Spanish. This also includes any warning label for the high calories, sugars, fats. This is a trend that we're seeing in multiple markets in Latin America. And There's a lot of public information available for Peru. Maybe not all of the resources would be in English, but luckily we live in an age where things can be translated, or we can find a great um, ally to be able to do these very specific tasks where we need to consider the product and consider what are the implications for that specific product. So now kind of getting to the end of the presentation, I did want to highlight maybe some success stories in the market. We won't go into too much, but for example, in Colombia, there's a gourmet popcorn from the UK that is known for gourmet flavors, high quality ingredients that has been able to penetrate the Colombian market. What they did in their market entry strategy is collaborate with Colombian distributors specializing in premium snacks. So they understand what their segment is and go for distributors that are participating in that specific segment that can support their growth within that market. And they introduced through these distributors their product. They also emphasized on what makes them different, their unique flavor profiles, their artisanal production, to be able to appeal to those consumers that have many options, but they're seeking something that's gourmet, that is maybe a different to what they're used to. And the outcome is that now they're available in gourmet stores and high-end supermarkets in major Colombian cities. So they're catering to that niche market of premium snacks. In Mexico, we have the example of the gin. It's a small UK gin producer, small batch UK gin producer, and they entered the market by partnering directly with the specialty liquor stores and upscale bars in urban centers like Mexico City or Guadalajara. And this entry strategy is a little different. So they went directly to those liquor stores, to those upscale bars, to be able to work with them directly and provide their gin and use them as a sort of direct connection to the consumers. What they did is they hosted some gin tasting sessions and a masterclass to educate the consumers and industry professionals about their products. This is a great technique also in the market to be able to advocate for those those competitive advantages, or maybe the taste or what makes the product special in an intimate setting where you're able to show consumers and industry professionals, make them experience what it is that you have to offer. And in result, they have grown in Mexico. They have penetrated the premium and innovative alcoholic beverage market, which we have seen at the beginning of the presentation. It is something that has been growing. So what do we need to know maybe for navigating those challenges in Latin America? We need to understand the local market dynamics. This presentation is a great start for that. And I would also be very happy to share any sort of information, knowledge, or expertise that we might have as a company regarding the local market dynamics. We are a company that we have many consultants, many workers, many team members in different countries. For example, we have our team in Mexico and Colombia. We also have our consultants in Peru that are able to provide just a general idea, orient maybe some ideas, get some structure into how you can enter in the best way specific to your product. There's also something that I always like to recommend is building strong local partnerships. I think that the best way to enter the market is being able to count on a strong partner in the market, whether that be a distributor or some sort of chain supermarket. There are many times where the distributor is the preferred method, where you can kind of reach a larger niche or larger segment, or target more territory in terms of distribution strategies. But there's also very strong allies that one can have, for example, with the registrations, with working directly to the supermarkets or to the consumers. There's also another option, and something that can be incorporated into a strategy, is tailoring products to local tastes. For example, what I can highlight here is we were working with a company that has chicken in a can or in a sachet. And the chicken is very natural. The chicken was premium chicken made in the USA. And they wanted to enter specifically Mexico and Colombia. And Mexico, it had a pretty open mind towards this product. But in Colombia, it was a challenge for consumers to see this as a premium product or see the value behind the chicken, because traditionally you want chicken, you just make chicken. So you don't, they connected it to tuna that comes in a can that is seen as something that's very convenient, maybe not so premium. And maybe they just didn't understand the concept behind it. We did a survey with a local company. We supported their entry of the U.S. company and found them a partner in the local market in Colombia that was doing a sort of marketing activity where they were able to get some feedback from the local consumers. And with this activity, they found that also the look of it or the use of it was hard for them to process. So what they did with that is, with that information, they were able to find maybe some applications for that canned chicken that were more relevant to the Colombian market. Because, for example, the initial information that was provided to this small group, this testing group, was, oh, you can make it with for example, a burrito, or you can do X, Y, and Z, but that wasn't necessarily so aligned to the Colombian market. So it's not always 100% necessary to change the product. What you can do is just change the way you present it or change the applications that are aligned with the specific market. And with that, I would like to sum this up, because if not, we won't have any time to close this webinar, and I don't want to take any more time. Thank you so much for listening, for the interest in Latin America. It's always great to see that Latin America is growing as a market in interest. It's incorporating itself into the big players. So I'm happy to discuss any sort of specific questions. We can get a meeting scheduled with my team where we can look at what your needs are and see how we can help you with that. Also, if there's any questions here now, I'm happy to respond. Thank you so much, Sandra, for the space. Thank you to the FDEA for allowing us to make this presentation.
Great, thank you, Diane. Very, very, very interesting. And yeah, a quick hop, skip and a jump around three important markets. And I think it was really interesting that the two sort of case studies you shared, I think were excellent, because I think they are very typical of an FDEA member. So I think it's good to see that those brands have actually gained foothold and done things that are gaining traction in those markets. If anyone would like to ask a question, either pop something in the chat, or if you look along the bottom, there is a little react icon you can press on and raise your hand, and I can bring you into the conversation. But perhaps to kick off, I think, Diane, a couple of things I scribbled down that I thought were interesting. You mentioned 3 chains that were across each of the markets. Can you talk to us a little bit about how they work? I mean, I think they're more the value end of the market from what you were saying, but do they have central offices per country? Is there any sharing across markets? I think that would be interesting to understand.
Yeah, of course. So, for example, Grupo Éxito is one of the very strong players in this region, and you can work directly with the Grupo Éxito of that country. For one of the more bigger markets, for example, Colombia, Mexico, you can work with them directly. It is important to maybe understand that this process will take a little bit longer, since it's such a big company. It's not so fast, or maybe it has more technical requirements to work with them. For example, there are supermarkets that will start discussing with you before you have your registration, and there's some that won't. Grupo Éxito, based off of what we have seen, they will not start discussing until maybe they see that there's some sort of progress with the registration for the product. Olímpica, Al Costo, there are also companies that you can work with them directly inside of that market. It doesn't necessarily have to be one for many locations, although they can recommend you probably to the other markets or to contacts within the company in the other markets.
Great, yeah, that's really, really helpful. And I think another question, I think I'm right in saying that sort of Mexico's GDP per head is probably twice that of the other markets. Would you say that Mexico is the better market to start in, or would you say there are certain retailers that are more active in any one of the markets that should become the target, i.e. don't just think Mexico, think of a particular chain and see if you should be targeting that?
Yeah, I do think in terms of size, Mexico is a great market. Also, in terms of if you're going to start translating everything, you have two big markets in Latin America. You have Mexico and Brazil. If you're going to start translating everything to Spanish, maybe it applies better to go into Mexico and also target the other smaller countries in Latin America because you're already using that information for one market, so you can adjust very easily to the others. Um, I do think that culturally there are a lot of similarities which also facilitate that entry into the market as you maybe start in Mexico and go into the others. I am biased. I love Colombia. I'm from Colombian descent, so I do have to say that Colombia is always great to start with. It can be a little maybe easier also to go into a smaller market and not just start with the big Mexico, because Mexico there's a lot of influence from the US which can work as a positive side and a negative side. So the positive is that since there's a lot of influence from the US, they are kind of more used to seeing those higher price points. They're used to seeing the more foreign products. But the con is that there's a lot of competition and it's hard to compete with a neighbor like US where it's a lot easier for the transport. So I do think that those are considerations. There's also considerations in terms of specifically the product. I think that it's also important to see what the product is and what's the best market that is aligned to that specific product, because there are some that might not work for all markets. For example, if you sell a very spicy hot sauce, maybe going into a country that doesn't have any spice in their cuisine might be a challenge. But if you have a spicy sauce, then maybe you can go into Mexico.
Great, good advice. Yeah, very welcome. There is a technical question around Mexico and whether you have any insight into how long the registration process might take for Mexico.
For Mexico, the last time I've seen it, I can't give an exact number exactly how long it might take in Mexico. I know that Colombia is the most recent one that I've been looking at in terms of the registration. So I do think that it is hopefully a little bit faster than a year. But this is something that is also same as Colombia, facilitated by maybe some industry specialists in that specific segment of registration. But I think it also depends on how technical will they have to get into the product. I believe if you're well prepared and the product is somewhat more of the less extreme or less regulated, then it will be a lot faster. So it also depends on that.
Right, and I don't know if you can see the next question, but it's similar in terms of finding the regulations to allow for sorting out labelling and stuff. I mean, we do have a couple of FDA members, Ashbury and Camden BRI, who are both labelling specialists. And we can certainly share contacts for both of those. But yeah, I don't know, what's your thought, Diane, in terms of, is it a service that you offer to help people navigate those regulations? Or you mentioned the specific organisations that are responsible in each market. What would your suggestion
Yeah.
be?
So these organizations, they provide the information, but as personally for me, whenever I see one of these documents or see these guidelines, I feel like I'm more lost after looking at it than before. So I do think that if that is something that you maybe see as a challenge, it would be best to work with a specialist in that. I would recommend seeing, for example, in these allies, do they have expertise in the specific market that you're looking for? Are they able to support, for example, for Mexico, for Colombia, Peru, are they able to support those specific markets? That would be important. If we're working on maybe a whole strategy or just maybe finding an ally in the local market in terms of distribution channels, in terms of a local partner for getting those clients started in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, we can also be supporting some sort of labeling or more technical activity. We do have some allies in these specific markets that we've been working with in terms of legal registrations. So in BIMA in Colombia and the other organizations, we're able to support in Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. So we have allies as well. So it just depends on what you're looking for, whether UK based or one that's based in the Latin American region. as the LATAM. Luckily, these do speak English, so you don't have to worry about the language, but we can help with that as well, of course.
Great. Yeah. And I think it also re-emphasizes the point you made about, when you're choosing who your local partners are, I mean, clearly they're much closer to all of that regulatory side of things. So a conversation that you need to have with partners as you start talking to them as well. So yeah, I hope that's useful. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
We have run out of time. So unless anyone's got another question that they want to pose very quickly, I think what we will do is say a very big thank you to Diane for giving us such a good overview of those 3 key markets. I think it's great to have you part of the FDA community. I can see that you're going to be very valuable to a lot of our members, given that I know this is new territory for an awful lot of people. And I know we've had people on the call in the alcohol sector, in the cheese sector, in the meat sector. So I think you've done a good overview that will be of interest to many. So just in closing, Diane's contact details are on the screen. This is actually the last of our online events for 2024. We've had a pretty packed program. So those of you that haven't connected with FDA until now, look out for the 2025 series, which we'll be announcing soon. And I hope that you find these very sort of informal interactive sessions useful. A quick reminder that we are getting together as the FDA in person on the 5th of December. If you haven't yet booked your place to come to our Export Forum event, I think you've got until Friday. If you go to ukfdea.com, you'll see the full programme and be able to book your tickets for that. And those of you that want to talk to us further about membership, if you're not currently a member, do reach out to me or Mel through the website, and we'll be happy to have a conversation with you. So yeah, thank you again, Diane. We'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe even have your breakfast now. But I very much appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy.